Good morning, Mitchell and Phil.
Good morning, friends. I am excited to be with you all on the podcast. It's
like the band's back together.
The band's back together.
Yeah, so welcome if you're listening. This is the Day After Sunday podcast where we talk about the why behind the worship. And so if you didn't get a chance to worship with us yesterday, either in person or online, we encourage you to do that. You can catch up with what we're talking about on this podcast, as well as just check out anything else on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. And we hope that you join us in coming weeks. So we kicked off week 1 of Advent yesterday, and our Advent series called O Come Emmanuel. And so, yeah, we just let's spend some time kind of breaking down what happened and discover some of the why behind the worship.
Can we start by a little dive on why we chose the title for the series, O Come Emmanuel?
Sure. I mean, I think pretty clearly that triggers in people to start singing that O Come Emmanuel Christmas carol, right?
Is it a Christmas carol or an Advent carol?
Well,
yeah,
loosely.
Yes, and
yeah. But yeah, so I mean, I think we sort of came to this conclusion that we wanted Advent to be familiar and simple. Not overly complicated. We feel like there's enough complications in life right now. And so the chance to really just open up and explore some things that seem familiar, but so that we can bring a new or a fresh interpretation to. I keep thinking of this phrase that's in a song I really like. The phrase is, the story is ancient but never old. And so... P.S. That song is called Gloria by Josh Garrels, and that can be found on our curated Advent playlist on Spotify.
It's a good promo.
But yeah, this, I mean, it is. It's an ancient but never old story. We come to it every year, and sometimes it feels a little bit, we've already done this, what are we going to get? But at least for me, I always get something new from the journey of Advent. And the same thing with this hymn, O Come Emmanuel. It's an ancient text. It's from the... different pieces of it came from the 5th and the 7th and the 9th centuries, so very, very early. It was a chant. And that's why, if you look in the hymnal, as I always encourage people, if you enjoy reading from the hymnal, you'll find it on page whatever. Or actually not page, number. That's a conversation.
That's another conversation, yeah.
Hymn number. But yeah, I mean, it's, if you look in the hymnal and you're familiar with music, you'll notice that there is not a time signature. Time signature is what's used to count, to measure out the music. And there is not one, because this is an ancient chant. And so there's not a specific number of beats in each measure. It sort of flows with the speech, with the patterns of the words. So
I did not know
so that's
that.
Why, yeah. So check it out. It's number 211. If you want to go grab a hymnal, we have lots here. So if you even want to keep one, you can probably keep one. But yeah, so we use this O Come Emmanuel as the basis for the whole series. This kind of calling back to the simple, ancient yet never old stories of Advent.
Never old.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Mitchell.
No, it's never old. I mean, the truth is sometimes, as professionals that work for churches, we can get kind of tied. We can tie ourselves up in a bit of knots, trying to figure out how we're going to do this again. And the truth is that if there's ever a story that can just hold itself without us doing too much to it, right, it is clearly this season of Advent and the coming of Christ. And I really think the world needs probably a little simplicity right now in how we approach God. And I think we're on the right track here by letting go a little bit and letting the story drive more than we're accustomed to. And that graphic, huh?
I love the graphic. It's lovely.
Very simple.
Good job, Mitchell.
Very simple.
It has worked out very well on the social medias, so I'm a big fan of it. It's
well,
great.
So Mitchell, you initially designed a different
That's
one
correct.
and then accidentally deleted
That's
it.
correct.
Right?
Thanks to Adobe for not putting a delete trash can file. That's insane to me, but
Like if it's gone, it's just
like
gone.
if you accidentally click delete, it's gone. There's no like recovering it. It's just gone. So yeah, and the delete is right next to the duplicate button. So because I was going to duplicate it to resize it for different formats. So yeah, it was a bad day. Not the worst day I've had, but definitely.
So for all of our Adobe people who work at Adobe who listen to this podcast, feel free to reach out to us and let us know how we can recover things in the future.
Adobe Spark.
It was in Spark.
Specifically. Yeah. Yeah.
All of our Silicon Valley folks.
Having said all that, this push towards simplicity, like I thought yesterday was that for us as a church. I thought the liturgy was both well crafted by, I think it was well crafted because it allowed us to get there. And I think that's actually much more challenging, is to not overcomplicate the liturgy. And so I thought yesterday really allowed the congregation to kind of move with us in this first week. And so it was really beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's important to say, too, that for those not familiar with the church year, you may be hearing a lot of words that you don't really, like you may know-ish what they are, but not really know what they are. So, for example, Advent, Lent is another one. Yeah. And those two in particular have a lot in common because they serve as these waiting periods leading up to what we as Christians deem the two most important events in our church year, that being Christmas and Easter. And so I read a devotional this past week that reminded us, the readers, to pay attention not just to the event, but to how we prepare for it. The more important the event, the more preparing it requires, generally, right? And so, and we see that in our lives play out too. Phil, you used a great example of a baby shower. I would add to that, weddings, funerals, dedications, baptisms, all these important things in our lives are the ones that we don't just wake up one day and say, oh, I think I'll get married today. I mean, you do. But some people do. We can have a conversation
Usually
about that too.
Usually Elvis is involved in that case.
Yikes. But generally speaking, for the broad population, the things that are most important get the most preparation. And so we pay attention not just to the fact that Christmas is coming, but we pay attention to the fact that our church mothers and fathers set aside an entire month, a little more than a month, for us to prepare our hearts and minds and bodies and spirits, and that's called Advent. And so even though in the Gregorian calendar, our New Year is January 1, we as Christians, specifically as liturgical Christians, we think of the start of Advent as kind of our new year. It's the reset. It's saying, we're getting ready for the Christ child, and then that's going to propel us into Jesus' teachings, Jesus' life, death, resurrection. Yeah,
liturgical being they're non-liturgical Christians who do not necessarily keep the special days in the Christian calendar as with treat them with the kind of respect that liturgical Christians do, and it's not really, I don't think, the space to argue the merits for either or, but we are a liturgical church, so it's not just Advent, Christmas, Lent, Easter. It's also Reign of Christ Sunday, it's Transfiguration Sunday, it's All Saints. There are just specific days within the calendar that help point us to the ever-evolving, always-encompassing story of God, right? And so Advent, is that. And it was a time of repentance, y'all. So preparation for church membership happened during Advent and the season of Lent, but particularly during Advent. Baptisms were conducted on Christmas Day in a lot of traditions. And so be still, wait, anticipate, and repent, ye sinners. Right? Is that what we say, Phil?
Something like that, yeah. Yeah, and I think it's just a good reminder that we do it every year this way because we need to be reminded in the same way we do communion every month, and a lot of churches do it every week. We're quick to forget things, so we keep them in the calendar and do it in a cyclical understanding because, one, that's kind of how we operate, right? We talk about often that there's this cycle of life, death, rebirth that we see throughout the seasons, and The same goes for the church calendar. Is that every year we come back to this same place, and as you said, right, like it's a bit of a challenge to figure out how do we do it anew, even though it's old, but at the same time, we don't have to recreate every time because the process in and of itself brings about a rebirth. So we don't have to like come up with something totally new every time, right? Like O Come Emmanuel is a beautiful going back to the ancient roots, as you were saying, Rebecca. Like this goes back to would you say 5th century? Like this, the text of this alone. I think you're muted. There we go.
Oh, sorry.
That's good.
So actually 9th century.
Okay.
My fault. So yeah, 9th century Latin. And then the music is from the 15th century. So, I mean, pretty much yesterday.
It's church music, basically.
Yeah.
Basically.
It's modern. Right.
Yeah.
Rebecca, is it true that the chanting bit was then like that kind of melody that we use or tune? The reason, one of the benefits to it being chanted is that there was someone who was leading the singing of this, and that they would be able to like kind of craft the space by their own pacing of the like chanting itself. Can you kind of talk about that
so I mean, the role of the cantor is what we would call it. Is the role of a leader. It's a lot of what I do, and written down music. Is really, it's not prescriptive, it's descriptive. And so we don't, sheet music was not invented to prescript how we sing or play. It was invented as a memory tool for songs that already existed. So it was first written as a visual cue to say, oh, your voice goes up, then it stays about the same, then it goes down, then it holds this note for a while. And so it was written to express what the humans who created these chants and these musical pieces were already doing. Mm-hmm. And so I always tell the choir, like, the music is not the printed paper. The music is what we bring to it, and the printed paper is a reminder. And we can make notes, we can change what's on the paper, or we can stay true to it, and there's benefits to both. But especially in a chant like this that's so ancient, there have been, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say thousands of different interpretations of it, maybe even millions. And we heard yesterday that tune was used 3 different times in 3 very different ways. We used it first as a congregational hymn at the beginning, and then the folk band brought a more folky, modern version of it by a little band that's out of Austin called the Relics. And the postlude that Lynn played at the very end of the service also had this same tune that was incorporated into the piano arrangement. So I think, it's such a cool thing. Hopefully people noticed it, but it was like that noticing but not distracting balance. That's the thread of the whole worship service yesterday.
I love that. I think it's great. Are we going to go back to that hymn over and over again throughout the series?
Not in as many ways as yesterday, for sure. We'll still use the spoken refrain of O Come Emmanuel. So the congregation also had that 4th piece, right, to remind them of saying it in the call to worship, and then saying it when Eli and Mitchell did the Advent candle reading. So we'll continue to kind of return to this phrase. But yeah. So Mitchell, you and Eli lit the first Advent candle, the candle of hope. Yes.
We did.
Usually you don't get to play the role of a family in the congregation. Usually you're, and we do this on purpose, right? We tend to kind of try to get the staff out of the way and let congregants do that. But it was neat to see.
We didn't even really get to play family because one of our kids was in the nursery, and then our other kid, Cash, first time ever going to children's church.
Of all the days, right?
Of all the days, right? We basically stand up there like schmucks without 2 kids with us. But yeah, it was really cool. We rarely, obviously, staff rarely get to light the Advent candle, which is a cool tradition. Typically happens earlier in the service, but this year we're pushing it out, past the sermon, to try to get into this reflective space. And we usually have families or new folks who join, right? We talked about Advent being a season of preparation. We'll have some new people join next week. So yeah, it was a really good way to ground the church, I think. The Advent candle in general, right? Usually around a wreath, not at White Rock, at least not for the past few years. Right, the series of candles are lit as to build anticipation. So you light one candle, and then you light 2 candles, 3 candles, 4 candles, and then you light the 5th candle, the Christ candle, on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. So it kind of builds this kind of light. But it also, I think, serves to ground us in that theme of the day, right? So we've got this kind of double layer here. We're going to spend time talking about the need for God to show up, and this longing for it through this O Come Emmanuel kind of layer, and then below it, or above it, I don't know, each week is thematic. And so hope then becomes something that we really focus on. And I thought Phil did a really good job with that in his sermon. I try to do a really good job with that with my children's time. But what we ultimately get to is the lighting of that candle then reminds the congregation that we're not just like after Christmas morning, right? That Christmas morning carries with it the things that we desperately need, which is hope, love,
joy,
peace.
Joy.
There's not a consensus on this, by the way.
There's not.
It gets kind of wild.
It does.
What order people... The only consensus is the pink candle, which we don't even have.
We do this year.
Do we? Is joy.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation we can have.
The Gadon.
The Gaudete candle, the joy candle. There has been a move in recent years. I say recent loosely. Let's say the last 20
500 years. Oh, okay.
Basically yesterday.
Basically yesterday. Seriously, if the 15th century is yesterday, then the last 20 years is like 9 o'clock.
Like now.
A moment ago.
But there has been a move to start to use blue in Advent instead of purple and pink. And so I did some reading on this, and of course there's no right or wrong. I see, I love blue. But the main reason for it, I thought was really interesting, at least in this article that I read, was saying that they wanted to differentiate Advent from Lent because purple is a somber color, and blue is the color of water, the color of baptism, the color of new life. And I get that, but part of me really likes this tying it to Lent, this tying it to, we're not jumping the gun and singing Joy to the World on Advent 1. We are waiting, right? The world is a mess. It is okay to be somber and say, there's a reason we need Christmas every year. And so just, for anyone who's listening who maybe has been in other churches and they use blue, I would be curious to see what your thoughts are, because we are using the more traditional purple and pink instead of blue. And that's part of my reasoning for it, right, is that I kind of like this tie to the more somber Lent and to remind us that there's a reason that we need the Emmanuel.
It's also the color of royalty. And so there's an interesting connection there with, Christ the King, being born mentality.
Yeah, so Phil, you had quite a doozy of a scripture.
Speaking of Christ the King.
Speaking of...
That's not, as you said, right, that's not what we think of in our typical kind of prepare ye for Christmas Day sort of thing.
Right.
So...
Yeah,
how's it going, buddy?
We get this whole apocalyptic text about the end of times and what's going to happen and all these signs and things that are going to give you an indication, and then we get a parable in the midst of it too of pay attention to the fig tree and all the trees, when they start to bloom, we know summer's right around the corner, and the same is true for your redemption is coming whenever you see these signs. And like I said in the sermon, why are we starting almost at the end of everything whenever we're looking here at the beginning, even before the birth of Christ, the Christ child? So it's a really kind of a mind bender a little bit to wrap your mind around this apocalyptic text, and yet at the same time, I think it's an interesting inclusion from those who put together the liturgical calendar and put these scriptures in the way that they are, because it really does set the context, right? There's a lot of chaos in world spinning out of control that's taking place when Jesus is born into the world, and especially in the context that Jesus is born into. And again, we just talked about purple and royalty. well, Jesus wasn't born as a king, as we know, right? Like in the traditional sense. Instead, lonely, meek, and mild, right? And so you have this unsettling aspect and unsettling context and oppression that's taking place in Israel at the time under the authority of the Roman government. And so it's an interesting grounding space to be in. And, full confession, I didn't dwell in the text a whole lot. Instead, I pulled some concepts from it and then kind of flirted with the concepts from the text along with ideas of the theme of hope in connection with this idea of fear as well. And so, there's a little bit of a preacher's privilege to just say, like, I'm not going to really dive into the scripture. Instead, I'm going to use themes out of it. But it's actually not my... As a biblical teacher, typically, I would rather dig deep into the text, but I felt like that wasn't the space, right? Like, again, this idea of trying to keep things simple, and this wasn't necessarily the simplest of all sermons, but it was way simpler than trying to unpack an apocalyptic text like that and really, like, do a deep dive on it scripturally. So that was my attempt of being simple.
Well, and there's something to be said, too, given that it was a parable, and we just came out of a couple weeks on parables. Amy Jo Levine reminds us over and over. I actually got to see her speak at Perkins Convocation a few weeks ago, so she's fresh on my mind. But she tends to remind preachers, especially, to resist the temptation to moralize and tie up all of the parables in neat little bows.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be confusing. They're supposed to be thought-provoking and imagination-driving. And so, yeah, I mean, I think using that text, Phil, as a tool, but not saying let's dig down and have to, like, solve it.
Right.
Or here's the moral of the story. Here's what God wants us to get from this. Pretty little bow, let's place it under the Christmas tree and not think about it again until next year. I think that does it a disservice.
Yeah. Yeah, yes, I will affirm what you said on that. I don't know, Mitchell, do you have thoughts before I'm not going to turn it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, like, that's what we're after, right? And I think, like, Amy Jo Levine's totally right in a, like, perfect world. But, like, right. I think that preaching the parables as often as we do, like, that becomes almost unsatisfactory as well, because it's just creating chaos over and over again. Yeah. So I think that it is a really fine line for the preacher to both address it and to create some sort of resolution, unless we think that our people are getting the resolution elsewhere, which the vast majority, I think, of people who sit in the pews aren't then going home and trying to find the resolution throughout the week, right? So yeah. I think it's a challenge. I think that in a perfect world, we would allow the parables to wreck us, right? And then we kind of, like, live with it. And I think what you did yesterday, Phil, was essentially steer us away from the wreck, right? That could have been apocalyptic visions for Advent 1, but did not like shield us from it, and really pushed us into a deep place of exploring the relationship between hope and fear. And so, I thought you did a really good job with it. And I think Amy Jill Levine's right. We try to put the neat little bow, like Rebecca said, and that totally strips the parable of any sort of, like, real power, right? Like, kind of like what I said, we cheat the parable a few weeks ago, right?
Yep.
And it's just a precarious situation, because we also have to create some sort of resolution for our folks, or otherwise we do, like, we can also participate in some spiritual harm where nothing is accessible, right? So I think there's that balance, but I thought you struck it well yesterday. I want to go back to the quote, though. This notion that hope is as hollow as fear.
Yeah.
I want you to explain that better to me right now.
Sure. Yeah, as I even said, right, it almost feels scandalous saying it in a church where in Christianity we've so elevated this idea of hope. So the full verse in the Tao Te Ching, which, if you miss a sermon, is a Chinese philosophy somewhat tied to Taoism, basically. So the whole one says, I think, success is as dangerous as failure. And then it says, hope is as hollow as fear. And the success with failure, as Elizabeth Gilbert said in the podcast I referenced, she says, like, I feel like people can wrap their minds around that because you can see very clearly how success can often drive people in bad ways in the same way that failure can, and disorient us. But that's what she says. Like, the same thing with hope and fear is that it can be extremely disorienting because it creates a false sense of future expectation. And I think that's what I really tried to land on, was this idea that, you know, she said, like, in the same way that, like, you can build this apocalyptic ending that often is focused around fear, you can also build this utopic future in your mind that never actually allows you to do anything productive in the world, because you just think, I mean, eventually it's all going to work out okay. And so all I have to do is kind of exist, and then, like, things are eventually going to work themselves out. And the reality is, I don't think that's the case, right? And I think that's pretty antithetical to the gospel too. It's not like we don't just sit around and just say, like, oh, well, the Son of Man's going to come back in the clouds, which is what it says in the text, right? So we don't have to do anything. We just need to, like, live. Like, that to me is a false hope. That's not a real sense of what the idea of hope is, at least in the text. What the text is inviting us to do then is to be aware and to be alert, as it says, so that we have hope enough for today, right? Like, don't let the day catch you unexpectedly. That means, like, you have to be ready today to be living the life that you want to be living, as if, right? What would Jesus do? Like, if I actually have a sticker somewhere in my office. I'm moving offices, so who knows where it is, but it says,
well,
Jesus is coming back.
Moved offices. You've already done that part of the job.
I know, it's all in here. It's just who knows where it all is. But it says Jesus is coming back. Look busy, right? Like, there's this mentality of, like, don't put off till tomorrow what needs to be done today, because hope enough for today is the reality that God is with us, and therefore we live into that reality today, not knowing what tomorrow brings. And I think does that summarize it better?
Yeah, I just, the quote from Cornel West is like, we must become prisoners of hope, right? Essentially, that's what we are as a people of faith, is also rattling around in my brain as I think about it. You know, this idea that being imprisoned to hope is something we don't necessarily want. And so I think it makes sense when I think of it through that lens. Like, hope can feel so fleeting, and then when we lose it, we keep talking about it, it feels inauthentic, kind of like what you're saying. Like, this idea that we'll just, it'll be better one day, and it absolves us of any sort of responsibility. And I'd much rather think hope as a catalyst for our work, rather than a delay or pause in our work, because the truth is, like, the world's so messed up. Like, if I don't have hope, then, like, I go the other way, right? Like, if I lose hope, then it's like, whatever, just
Jesus take the wheel, right?
Yeah, totally. However the world's going to unfold is how it's going to unfold. But if I have hope, I feel like I have far more, I'm more action oriented. And so I really appreciated the way your sermon kind of pushed me to think more about that. And I think the best of cases is when we want to lose hope, we still are kind of entrapped by it because of the community we're a part of, right? So hope isn't then just an individual thing, it's a communal thing that we do together, right? So that if any one of us loses hope, but we remain committed to the community, then the community holds the hope for us, right?
For sure.
I think that is also an undercurrent of pastoral care, right? You know, we just got word about, you know, someone in our church having a really hard time, obviously with bad medical news of a loved one, right? And our role then is to, like, still hold the hope for that individual and family, even if they cannot, right, hold it for themselves, and invite them to see it if they struggle to find it, right? And so I think in some ways hope is far more dense than we often crochet on our pillows.
So here's what I didn't say, and if I had more time, maybe I would have. But what Liz Gilbert goes on to say is that whenever her partner was dying of cancer, a lot of her family members, her partner's family members, kept clinging to this hope that there was going to be a miraculous healing. And she says, it's not that I didn't have hope that she was going to get better. I had hope that I was going to have another day with her. And she said, in so doing, I was able to remain present with her, whereas many of her family members were so stuck on this idea of hoping for a miracle. She's like, I don't think they were fully present with her in those last few days, which I will always value those last few days because I got to be fully present there with her. And I think that's the potential hollowness of hope, right? Is that if we become so far ahead of ourselves that we just end up losing the here and now, and you don't even see the sense of community anymore because you're just anticipating what could be without living in the what already is.
Yeah, then I guess my bugaboo here then is really, it's not hope that's the issue, it's the what we hope for, right?
That's
so
right.
Hope as an action, as a verb, is not hollow. It is what has our attention, or what we hope for, right? And I think the misguided places we put hope becomes really the problem, not the actual work of living hopefully, right?
Right. And that's why I tried to focus on the time orientation piece of it a little bit.
Yeah, totally.
With fear too. Yeah.
I wonder if this speaks also just to a failure in our language to fully encapsulate it.
Totally.
Because I would say, what we're talking about, I wish there were another word, because I don't think hope is hollow. I think that there are other things that we put in place of hope, like wish or longing or striving after or clinging to something. I think hope itself, I just wish there were a more robust word, right? Like there are different interpretations of the word love in other languages, and in the Bible we see different, it's agape, it's eros, it's what are the others? It's like companionship, and then romantic love, and then
the
friendship,
brotherly love,
and then like self-giving, pouring out service love. Anyways, I wanted to read, there's a song that has been stuck in my head that I discovered recently, and it's by a band called Ordinary Time. So if we're talking about the Christian year, and Phil and I have talked about this a few weeks ago, Ordinary Time is the times that don't fall into these high holy seasons like Advent and Lent. And so, anyways, the band's called Ordinary Time. The song is called All Shall Be Well. And I just wanted to read this verse because I think it speaks to what we tried to capture yesterday and what we try to capture throughout Advent. The years unending seem here in this in-between. Peace on earth, God's will for men seems like it may have come and went. The wars they linger on, the darkness overcomes. We need not stars but sun. Break in, O coming one, for sometimes we cannot tell that you will make all well. I think that's week one.
That's week one. There it is. There it is. Well, speaking of, I'm almost like pushing us to wrap here, but like, if you're on our podcast and you're subscribed to it on anywhere you listen to podcasts, hopefully you're seeing that we have a daily podcast going out too. That's about a 3 to 5 minute little daily reading, as well as reflection and a little pondering question. So we hope that you'll check that out every day throughout the season of Advent. It's just another additional piece to help you in your journey through Advent. And again, this idea of community, right? It's something we get to do together. And we have a Facebook group. If you search, I think it's called WRUMC Devotionals. You can join us on there to have conversations as well. I'm trying to think of where else it is. But yeah, you can find it at wrumc.org/Advent and find the link there if you're not subscribed to any of our podcast spaces. Oh, Mitchell's trying to talk, but I think he's muted.
There it is. We're trying to push everything to that Advent slug, so wrumc.org/Advent. I'll just say this. I've listened to it both days now. I get a gold star, right?
2 for 2.
But I am we sound like we're, shout out to Dexter, we sound like we're on NPR or something. It just sounds fabulous. So super short, easy, easy on the ears. It's going to set your morning up with your cup of coffee, your little commute when you're getting mad on 635 or whatever you're doing. Just like pop that on and there's some really good text in there that I think really challenge us and also create the space we need to appreciate this season. So.
When else do you read out of 2 Peter, right? Like, that was today's text.
Sure.
Nice job, Rebecca.
Truth.
Yeah, Mitchell says that he divided those up just randomly, but I'm pretty sure he gave me the hardest one.
I did. I divided them up randomly.
I love it.
For sure. It was like the, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Like if you're creating a little group for the kickball tournament or something.
Advent kickball. Here we go.
You got a bad draw.
Short straw.
All right.
Well, friends, Advent 1.
Advent 1.
Down.
Next week we turn our attention to peace. So we will have a new ornament to color. Next week's
for our kids.
die-cut ornament. And we'll have Mitchell, you'll be preaching from Luke.
That's right.
Earlier in Luke.
Yeah.
We hope you join us. And big thanks again to everybody who stayed. We didn't really talk about this last week to decorate the church for Christmas. Maybe we can get into it a little bit more next week. That it's beautiful, but it also has meaning. Each of the things that we put up, the sparkly lights, the evergreen, the stars, all that kind of thing, have meaning for what we hope to get from Advent. So thanks for all who were a part of that November Fest last week.
For sure. Awesome. Well, we'll join you all next week for another podcast. But in between, check us out for the daily devotionals.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye.